Ladies and gentlemen, we're a couple of minutes away. Just to say, this is the audit session, so you should have a red blob on your piece. So just making sure that everyone is in the right session, because the tax and the corporate reporting ones are at the back. Are we ready to go, Naomi? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Miles Thompson. I'm the chair of the Accountancy Europe Audit and Assurance Policy Group. Also, I'm a UK audit partner who, for the last probably 5 years, I've been quite heavily involved in our development in my firm with data and analytics and how we use it on our audits. So I'm looking forward to having the next hour and having a real fruitful discussion with you. So what we want to look at is really how innovation and technology is changing the way we do our audits. The ability now to be able to download from our client 100% of the transactions and analyze that just wasn't available 10 years ago. And I would say the days of sampling are dead. They are going, they will not be anymore. So, I think there is enormous change happening in here. And I know the firms, are doing an enormous amount of innovation in working out how best to do this. And we've got two very experienced panelists today. Both, I hope, are going to come from completely different points of view, but I'm sure we'll agree with each other as well. So firstly, Julia Walsh, who is from the FRC, which is the UK regulator, and Julia has been heavily involved with the audit inspection of the firms in the UK, specifically on the IT aspects. And then Olaf, and I'm awful with names, Riedel, there we are, who is a partner with Ernst & Young in Germany, who again has been, working with audit teams and with EY on how they do data analytics. So what we're going to do first is allow them to have a few minutes each just to sort of give their perspectives, and then I'm going to do questions with them, but also I want to hear from you on the floor as well. So please, if you've got some questions, if you want, have a burning issue you want to ask, put your hand up. I'm sure we can get some microphones around, so please do. Let's make this hour as much as interactive. I mean, the three of us probably could speak for an hour on our own, but let's try and make this much more of an interactive session as we can. So, Julia, do you want to go first? Ladies first? I think that's most appropriate.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Miles. So, good afternoon, everybody. I am Julia Walsh, and I'm a specialist in the audit quality review team at the FRC. The FRC is the UK's audit regulator. And I actually specialise in IT audit and also in analytics. And a couple of years ago, I was heavily involved in the research and the work we did to produce our thematic review on the use of audit data analytics in the audit of financial statements. And we published that early last year, but I've carried on with my interest in the intervening 18 months or so. So I was just thinking on the way here that actually I've had a reasonably paperless journey. I came over this morning. And the number of paperless transactions I've been involved in. So releasing a lot of deferred revenue as I came, using my paperless ticket on my phone to get onto the train, going through the motorway barrier with the number plate recognition software to take my motorway charge, again, get into the car park with the number plate recognition, moving my mobile phone through 3 different countries with the data being taken, using my data bundle at each stage. So technology is absolutely changing and has changed the way that we're living. It's changing the way that entities operate. And therefore, wouldn't it be great, isn't it great, that audit teams can utilise the huge amount of granular data that's out there in today's business world to improve audit quality. And at the FRC, we recognise that audit quality can be enhanced by the considered use of data analytics. That's what we came out and said in our review, and I don't think that view has changed since. And we have seen examples in practice where data analytics has been used to improve audit quality, to improve auditors' understanding of the entity they're auditing, to improve the risk assessment that's been done, and also to improve the actual testing through actual coverage, and also helping auditors focus their audit efforts on the areas of heightened risk by actually being able to sort through which are the more routine areas and which are the more judgmental areas. So we absolutely do believe that data analytics can be used to increase audit quality. There's so many things that an auditor can do with data analytics. There's so many ideas. There's so much data out there, the techniques, the amount of data that can be put onto the desktop or accessed by the desktop of an auditor, that for an innovative auditor, that the possibilities are almost endless. So how do we actually do that in a controlled way and in a way that actually meets regulation expectations? And we must remember that audit is a discipline, and where investors and stakeholders see value in an audit is because it's been done with widely understood and recognised standards. And I think that's why the audit world is regulated. So I think one of the things that I'm hoping we'll get out of today is we can explore that tension between innovation and Miles is smiling, innovation and regulation. And there is a tension there, but also tension can be creative. And I really value the opportunity to have a discussion. We can kind of learn from each other and actually move the debate along. And I think that's where the kind of acceptance of what fits into standards, etc., comes through actually discussing it, looking at examples and taking things forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. My name's Olaf Riedel. I'm a partner with EY. Have started in '91 as an auditor. But having an IT background, Miles, I need to correct you because data analytics is not 10 years old. When I started really in '91, I did already data analytics with, well, more simpler means. So I had a laptop which looked like an oversized toaster, but I could get hold of data of the clients, like, for example, all the journal entries, and use it as a means to work through the balance sheet and the P&L. And guess what? It was really efficient. So it's not only the quality on one hand, it's also the efficiency, which is quite important to us as auditors, because there's also always tension between efficiency on one hand and quality on the other. And we need to meet the right quality on one hand, but also need to be efficient. And looking at that and what I did about 30 years ago, a lot has evolved since then. Still, the data that can be obtained and be looked at from an auditor standpoint, probably the amount of data has risen a lot. That's one point. The number of systems involved has evolved as a second point. And complexity has risen. However, looking at it, let's say, more from an IT kind of person's point of view rather than an auditor's point of view, still everything can be put into, let's say, buckets that I can look at. And then the auditor's perspective comes in, and then I need to understand, okay, what does the data tell me about the correctness of information that I've pulled through the balance sheet and P&L. And while you're saying, and that's a valid point, regulatory means might be a bit late sometimes in terms of what we can do as auditors. I think there needs to be a drive in order to use more modern means, not only in data analytics, but also for other means, for, let's say, artificial intelligence or machine learning, to make use of these tools in order to be more efficient, but also to deliver the right quality in our audits. And I think it's being in that profession for such a long time, I'm striving to make this usable for our audit teams. That's very important to me, because I think to deliver the right quality, using the right technologies or using the right techniques, is a must, because also on our client side, we see lots of changes. So the internal control systems are changing. So we will probably see some kind of continuous monitoring. So this will change the way we as auditors do audits in the future. And what I see here, and this always involves kind of data analytics, is that we need to grow with our clients on one hand, also need to grow in terms of regulation, that we allow things that might be unthinkful at this stage, but are possible and are helpful at the other stage.
Thank you both. And I think it will be maybe interesting to get into that challenge of innovation versus, and how you can let people fail, let's say, in a way that I agree does not compromise audit quality, but what I see sometimes is that people are worried about failure. So there's some teams that they do all these audit, analytic techniques, but they also do all the other stuff as well because they're worried about being second-guessed and failed. And I think that doesn't help us going forward. So we do need to try and find some good balance in this way. So let's start with the first question. And and maybe Olaf, I'll start with you on this. Is what do you see as the sort of the greatest challenge that auditors are facing in using data analytics, on audits? Because I see, that the teams that I work with in the UK, they struggle sometimes of understanding, exactly where, what they need to do with the data and how they get the data and all that kind of. So it'd be useful just to get your thoughts, what you are seeing, and I realize that you're very experienced at this. I mean, doing it for 20 years or 30 years.
Maybe looking at the data analytics people or data analysts in the first instance. Unfortunately, the audit profession is not the first to discover the value of those people. Yeah. So one of the greatest challenge of nowadays is to really find the right capabilities who may do those types of data analytics on one hand, and then the other is to make all our auditors understand what the value really is in doing data analytics. So what is the outcome of data analytics if you do it with your audit matters? So it's a combination of, first of all, getting those capabilities. Secondly, then putting them together in one team with the auditors. I feel reminded, because I did a lot of IT audits, and I feel reminded to my very first days when everybody had problems to understand the issues I brought up in IT, and they said, "What backup? What are you telling me?" And probably it's about the same with data analytics at the stage, to come to a kind of common language and make the data analysts understand what really needs to be the outcome of analytics that are being done. So that's the first challenge. The second one, as I said, is integrating those data analysts into our teams, also in terms of not only looking at evidence on one hand, but also on internal control systems on the other, because lots of data analytics will be performed around the internal control systems. When it comes to data, that would be the third part, integrity and completeness of information that is being obtained by our clients is one of the first and foremost things if you obtain the data, to make sure that you use the right data. So looking back at what I learned from experience is if you start lots of analytics and then in the end notice, well, it wasn't complete, then all the analytics dissolve at a certain moment. Yeah. So making sure integrity and completeness of information at the very first stage is quite important. Obtaining the data, although you said, well, it's quite easy. Still, it is really hard to get some of our clients, especially in the view of GDPR, it is very hard to convince our clients that they may give us the data on one hand, and secondly, yes, we have a right for it on the other. So, but there's a lot of discussion going on with clients, also security terms, etc., etc. Finally, I think a question that has been risen already is, do we have the regulatory environment to really use data analytics, and what is the extent we may use it? Can data analytics serve as audit evidence? Yes or no? Or do we still need to do some audit sampling? Currently, we do need to do audit sampling, even if we know from the data that everything is accurate. Yeah, so there's something that needs probably to shift in that corner.
Just one, before going to Julie,
yeah, sure.
One thing I want to come back on. You talked about the importance about having maybe the data scientists or the people, integrated with the team. And I suppose, do you see, though, that as a hindrance to scale? Because it may be fine doing this on 100 audits, but when you're on to 2,000 audits, can you really scale up for that? Is that having that expertise, is that actually going to be the main hindrance of really getting this used on all audits?
Yeah, maybe in the beginning it is something that's hard to scale, but we're working also on audit tools that help the auditors really to do the analytics in a more, let's say, productional or factory way. Because there is a lot of course, you have a lot of quality issues, and you cannot innovate on any audit. That's also not efficient. Yeah. So what we are doing is try to deliver, let's say, standard sets of analytics to the teams, where they then can match the respective data and do the analytics and have to work with the outcomes. Let me just refer to example that is already live, if you want so, for a number of years in Germany, yeah, because the tax authorities have started in 2001, so 17 years ago, to collect information of our clients in a data form and to do data analytics on it. And tell you what, they are pretty good in that. They are pretty good in that, and they don't care if, with regard to regulation, it's a different story, I know, but they don't care as long as there is a tax plus that they receive from a tax authority field audit, yeah, who cares? So just to give you the balance, and the years before it was somewhat different because the auditor got more information than the tax field auditor. This has changed a lot already.
I'm glad I'm not a taxpayer in Germany. Anyway, Julia.
So a slightly different angle. I left practice back in 2012, and just before I left, we were rolling out some of the standard data analytic techniques, but we weren't really wrapping methodology around it. And I think what we've seen in practice through my time at the FRC is that the techniques are there, but auditors really need to understand the evidence that they're providing and how it fits into their audit approach to get the real benefit from it. And so we've seen and we've encouraged over the years firms to wrap the methodology around that analytics so auditors can be confident about what it's giving them. That means that some of the debates about does this fit the standards or not kind of can go to a firm-wide level. It also means, and going back to something that Miles said, that the audit teams can then start not doing some of the testing that they were doing before because they're confident about how the work fits into the audit. And this is my personal view. I don't like seeing files that have got too much work on. I like seeing files that have got just the right amount of work on. And therefore, when you see over-auditing, then that's not really efficient. And to my mind, that's not as good a quality audit as an efficient audit. So I think the auditors actually being confident about actually what are we doing this data analytic for? What attributes are we trying to test? What assertions are we trying to test? And where does that fit into my methodology and my body of audit evidence? I think that's one of the challenges, to actually get the most out of the techniques that the market have got available. Completely agree with Olaf that getting hold of complete and accurate data is key. It is a challenge. I think what we're seeing firms do is invest in not only people who can do that, but also tools to help automate that and to give the audit clients the confidence that this is being done in a controlled way. They're speaking to a specialist, they're using a standard tool. We have seen in the UK, we've been reported to us that some entities have been reluctant to pass over data for analytics because of GDPR. I'm kind of hoping that's not our regulation, that's a different regulator for us. I'm kind of hoping that that's a transition type of thing, but there is some reluctance around passing over data at the moment. And the last thing I wanted to mention is we're interested in audit quality across the piece, and it's actually getting that consistent use of analytics across a practice. So we've always found, and going back, I'll go back to the 80s and doing some analytics, that data analytics can be used to solve a particular problem for a particular audit. But to use this enhanced capability, we want to see some consistency across the audits, because what we've found through some of our research is that when an auditor works on one audit and uses an analytic well, they're more likely to go on to their next audit and use the same analytic well. So having that consistency, that's not to say one size fits all, it absolutely doesn't, but having some kind of consistency in approach, I think can help audit quality, which does mean that firms have to kind of make some decisions about where they want to put the emphasis of their rollout and implementation strategies.
Any thoughts from the audience this time? Any differing views, any areas that somebody wants to make a point on this, on challenges, what they're seeing? Jens, I'm sure you can shout.
I'll do my best.
Oh, hang on, there's a microphone. Is it coming? Oh. All right. Oh. Apparently every chair in its armrest has a microphone. You're being recorded, so don't make any side comments. No, he's just about, I think he's just the other turn it on.
While I'm getting on, I'm on now. I'm Jens Roeder from the Nordic Federation of Accountants, and we've been really looking at this for the last 2.5 years or so. One question and one observation. One of the big challenges we can see, and it's staring us in the face as we sit here, is getting the right people for the job for the future, getting the right professionals who are skilled enough and who understand the mechanisms of a modern audit. And we haven't solved that, but really like to hear your views on it. The other thing is, as we are privy to accessing more and more data because it's available and we have the tools to do so, this is actually challenging us in terms of the auditing standards that we are required to be in compliance with. You've alluded already to 315 sampling. Haven't solved that yet, I think. But the other one, of course, is 240 on fraud and the responsibility that the auditor has for fraud in terms, again, of being able to access data in a way and being able to analyze data in a way that hitherto has not been possible. And I would really like to hear your views, because again, these are things we're thinking about. Really like to hear your views on how you see this progressing for the future. Thank you very much.
Which one do you want to start with, Julia? Well, I think there were the two questions. One about the people. Okay.
With regard to capabilities, that's what I addressed. I think there's a way that you can address it, because after all, data analytics is not magic. Yeah. So what you can do as a starting point, and everyone in this room probably has been using Excel or something like that, that's data analytics already. So what we are doing, in addition to trying to hire those people, is to train our people in let's say, even bit more advanced analytics than Excel. Yeah, and that's a way forward that I see for the profession as well. As I said, coming from IT, that's very much the same story, because nowadays you need to have a common understanding of what IT means, but you also have to have a common understanding of what data analytics means. And getting used to it, getting accustomed to it, helps you also to do your profession. So there's no way around to just going into trainings with that. And probably it's also a precondition to make the right use of the data analytics people that you then hire. Yeah, so I think it's trying to do it both ways from the people side.
I mean, one of the things, though, I've always worried about is that, you know, our qualifications and what they teach us at the university when you were doing accounting to there, at the moment it's still very linked to the auditing standards and the accounting standards. And it's not about how an ERP system works or those things. And I think that's got to change, is my personal view, is though I completely agree that maybe an auditor can't be everybody. We have to have specialists. We have to pull in somebody who's a specialist on.
Yeah. We have a number of auditors institutes here. So, and what we started some years ago is let's say a kind of training for IT auditors specifically. And probably we'll see data analytics trainings for auditors as a second or next step. Probably we see all machine learning for auditors as a very next step. So I think there needs to be some development also from the Auditors Institute to cope with those challenges. Yeah.
Okay. And I think getting on to Jens's next point, which is, for me, it's should the profession actually be moving forward and saying, right, actually we can do more, you know, we can analyze all the journals. We should be able to find more frauds. Is that where we should be moving? And personally, this is a personal point, sometimes we just hide behind standards and say, oh, we're doing a risk-based approach. You know, 240 says we're not, you know, only meant to find material fraud and all this thing. I mean, it'd be interesting. I think we do need to move forward personally on this. And I think it would help with all, especially when you look at the UK, you know, some of the scandals and everything like that, and where the profession is on the expectation gap, let's say. But Julia, sorry.
So, interestingly, when we were doing our research, a number of the teams we looked at who had done some quite deep analytics on their entity said, and we also found a fraud. It was a fraud that was not within the scope of materiality, but it was a detailed fraud, and they'd been able to go back. Now, being able to do that and present something to your entity is completely different to having the expectation that if there's a fraud there that's not material, you'll find it. And I think if we were to actually go to that level, I think we'd be setting the bar at a level where we might then get distracted from the main role of the audit, which is to produce an opinion on the financial statements. So I think at the moment the first step is, as more data analytics gets performed, the profession is likely to find more frauds. But I would, my personal view is that I would hesitate from setting the bar too high in terms of that expectation. So perhaps there's some middle ground there that can be taken advantage of in the meantime, of kind of giving some extra value to the entities that we audit without necessarily having that expectation that every audit fraud will be found.
Okay. There's a question just... Naomi, just about that.
My name is, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm from the German Institute, and I often hear that the tools are available to do data analytics. I'm not sure if this is really true, at least for the small and medium practices, because what we hear in Germany, at least, is that there are tools available to do some, I would call them kind of easy data analytics, which would be like postings over the weekends and stuff like that, or postings during unusual times. But if you want to do like really more complicated data analytics, like talking about three-way match, or looking at segregation of duties, who post the transactions through all the processes and so on, then the tools that are available, like, I don't want to mention specific names, but like Caseware and so on, I think people are struggling to do these more complicated analytics with these tools that are available. I know that the big four, at least the big four companies, they invent their own tools. They have the money for that, but the smaller, medium practices, they're struggling with that. That's at least what they tell us. I'm not sure if you have an opinion on that.
Probably that's not the issue. So there are so many tools out there to do data handling, to do data analytics. So you can start with ACL, with IDEA, which are around already for, I don't know, more than 30 years, which are traditional audit tools for data analytics. And then you have those click views and how they are called to do data handling. So it's not about the tools. The real issue that you just described in a narrow sentence was that having an understanding what data needs to be combined on one hand and where to get it from, and what then the audit evidence is that you get out of it. That's probably more the issue that the smaller firms are struggling with, because they often do not have the specialists to get to that understanding. So there is no golden bullet to solve it, probably, but there are outside auditors which might help in that understanding. And the other way again is training. Yeah. So if you start to work with systems like Navision or with Microsoft AXP or with SAP or whatsoever, then if you get to below the surface, then you also get an understanding what data analytics is about, and get a better understanding what you use for data analytics. And probably that's more the issue rather than the tools.
In the UK, we are beginning to see providers coming into that space. I was at a service at a session at our Chartered Accountants Institute, the ICAEW, last year, where there was a provider to that middle market, showcasing what their product could do. So, and there are some more sophisticated techniques being made available. So I think that there is a space there, and we're beginning to see providers going into that space.
One of the things that I've seen is that actually the smaller the audit and the less complicated the ERP system that client has, the easier actually probably it is to do a lot of these techniques. But I do understand, everything that's said here. But, if you've got a very complicated, SAP ERP system with enormous amounts of sub-ledgers, it gets more complicated. And you need the bigger tools and things, but actually being able to use, let's say, IDEA, which is the caseware tool, I think that on those smaller audits is similar. And I believe, and in Sweden, they do a lot of data analytics on all their clients. So I think it can be done. I think a lot of it maybe is the education. I'm going to move on to the next question, and we've covered this a bit. This is about where do we see data analytics radically changing what auditors do today, and we've talked about potentially in the fraud area whether that would piece. But it'd be useful to get any other thoughts on this. Do you want to start, Olaf? I think it's probably what are you seeing? Where we talked a lot about improving audit quality. So where is it improving audit quality? What is it changing? What are we doing differently that actually is making this better?
Yeah, one of the things besides usual data analytics that I see in our practice already is process mining. I'm not sure if you've heard of that. You just pull in transaction information bundled with logging information and also the constitutional data behind it into a data analytics machine, and it shows you how processes within an ERP system have run. What do you get from that? What do we gain from that? Well, you can already see what exceptional ways of working through the ERP system have taken place. That's quite radical, I must say, because when you think, well, there are 2-3 ways for order to cash in this company, maybe 4. And then you do the process mining, and then you discover it's 470. This can be an issue, but it's at least worth looking into it. Okay, which ways does the order to cash process take within the company? Have the approvals been done? So are the values all right, etc. So you can learn quite a lot from process mining, and what sits behind that, and that's quite interesting, and what I see in the future as well, is lots of automation of those audits in terms of how does the internal control system really work in the company? Can I rely on that? So lots of the testing I see in the near future even that could be automated by those tools. Another one that I see is the use of software bots. So software that already can sit on every PC like a user, but in effect is a trained bot, so a program that can do things for you, like doing the analytics for the assets, for the whole asset scheme, for example. Can test all the depreciations that have taken place, so all deferrals, etc., and give you a result like someone who would be sitting in front of the PC. We are using that technology already in some of our audit fields, and it works quite well, because you need then a standardized input, and then you get out a standardized result. You don't have to put a hand anymore to any of those results. So that's something that is already taking place today. In future, I can imagine that machine learning will change the way that we do audits by discovering, or let's say not discovering, but maybe by questioning the estimates that clients have made, and also trying to get the reasoning behind that. And that's probably something for the further future. Let's put it like this.
So do you see auditors being replaced by robots?
Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. So in one instance, yes. But well, will there be a replacement? Up to a certain point, yes. I think the way that we are doing audits will change dramatically. So we probably will not look anymore into accounts directly. We probably make use of bots and also machine learning systems to do the audits. But then, who audits the machines? Who audits the bots? So I think there will be a shift of the way we do the work, and probably we will also take a closer look into the business, which at some point of time might have been lost as well. So getting back to the basics of understanding the business and then asking the right questions probably will... I see a big shift in what auditors do in the future.
I'm glad I'm retiring.
So, when we were kind of musing, I'm wondering about the time scale, because in one way, it kind of feels that some things are moving quite slowly and other things are moving quite quickly. But one of the things that I'm interested in is to what extent the entities will start controlling their business by data analytics, because when we've spoken to auditors who've perhaps presented back to their audit clients the output of the data analytics, people on the board or the audit committee have gone, well, why aren't we doing this for ourselves now? And I'm wondering whether actually those entities will start doing data analytics for themselves, and then the challenge will be, how do we audit the way in which that business is controlled? So that's one of the ways I think will change. Quite a lot of the ways in which data analytics have been used so far and in the kind of immediate future are around some of the more routine areas of the business. And it would be great to get some support for the areas where auditors have to apply judgment, not to replace that judgment at all, because that's one of the crucial things that an auditor brings to that relationship, but to help inform that judgment and challenge that judgment, and to help auditors challenge their clients. So I think something around there would be good. Artificial intelligence or machine learning, and going back to what we heard this morning, I think gives us some real challenges to the way that we've understood an audit being done, and it's things that we are thinking about, because traditionally the entity has the data and it has to keep it for a certain amount of time, and the auditors keep their files that say how they've audited that data and how they've come to their decisions, and you put the two together and you should be able to do the audit again. Now, if you're using machine learning, then that's going to take a certain view on a population at a point in time. You come back the next day, it's going to have learned something, and it might actually do something different. So that's a challenge in terms of how do you know exactly how that algorithm has worked at the time the auditor applied it to that data set. And it feeds into some of the things Clara was saying this morning about transparency and actually being able to understand what that's doing. And that's coming up in other things like GDPR as well. So there are some challenges there, but interesting ones. And I was debating with a colleague this morning that in the old days, we used to say to the old days, go and review the cash book, and they go and get the manual cash book out, and they review and come back and say whether something was odd. And you wouldn't necessarily have programmed that junior member of staff to go and do that. You'd say, well, okay, they've done it, they've picked out some odd items. You ask a different junior member of staff, and they would have gone and potentially come out with some different items, but hopefully got the biggies. How different is that to using a piece of simple machine learning to go through and look for some odd items? That's a rhetorical question, because unfortunately I can't give you the answer, but it's safe to say that we are thinking about it. But those are techniques that we'd like to be able to use.
One of the areas that is probably got heightened press is, of course, forward-looking statements. Now a lot of the judgments, whether it's going concern, whether it's impairment reviews, are all based on, anticipating what's going to happen in the future. And I suppose with machine learning or whatever, is that the auditing or being able to opine on that's going to become easier?
What I anticipate happening is that the ability to challenge models, to produce new models, to actually understand how your assumptions can combine, and to use data analytics and also sort of more sophisticated ways of modelling to understand how that can happen, and to actually then inform the auditor's judgment and inform the auditor's challenge. And I think that's something that can be really useful and valuable, and we're beginning to see. But as I say, it's getting something to aid those elements of judgment, because the things to help the routine side of things are kind of there if we use them. I think will be useful.
For me, it can deliver the unpredictability that can happen, and I suppose that's.
Well, the question is if it needs to deliver that. So I think, again, analytics and machine learning in a way is a kind of analytics only, because it has a mathematics background. But predictive analytics can help a lot to understand the data better that is present. So, and maybe we come to better discussions with the client on what the future might be. And if the notes to financial statements and all the statements in there, which with regard to risks of the company, can be challenged in a different way. And that's what Julie mentioned is probably the right thing, that we should be able to make use of that technology to give better challenges to our client and challenge the information that we obtain in a different way. And that goes back again to understanding the business in a different way. The question is which data should be involved in doing that analytics. Yeah, it could be a nightmare to use all the information out there. Probably we won't do that, but it's a good approach to start with what the company uses.
Any thoughts, any questions from the audience? Anne? Naomi's coming. No one's going to use the microphone in their
Thank you.
seat pockets.
No, I'm not risking it. I'm from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland, ICAS, one of the professional training bodies, and we're very mindful of the challenges that the advances in technology present, not just to auditors, but also in reporting and tax and the other services that our members provide. But we also see this as an opportunity. There is an opportunity for us to actually adapt, and if we respond in the correct way, to create the profession of the future that can perhaps add greater value in the services that they provide. And so with that in mind, I would be interested in getting your views as to who the right future professionals would be. Are they going to be the traditional accounting graduates that we then train in data science to understand how the technology is developed, or will we employ data scientists and then train them in audit methodology to get the best out of them in terms of the output? And based on what we've heard is that actually this audit kind of training and rigour that our trainees and students obtain actually give them that business understanding and awareness that enables them to ask the challenging, difficult, probing questions of their clients.
That's a tough question, yeah. What are the future bodies that will, or the future professionals that will drive the profession? Probably none of them. Yeah, so I think there needs to be an evolution of our profession also in terms of the university skills that are being taught, and probably it's a combination of those two. It's probably a combination of those scientific skills on one hand, but also the, let's say, accounting / business skills on the other hand. Because what I see is that you need to have both skills combined to a large extent in order to be successful in the future. And probably that needs also to reflect in all the schemes that you see at universities.
And we're all going to be replaced anyway by robots. So,
I think the biggest skill is still going to be communication skills, and to be able to talk between the data scientist and the, to actually pull everything together to understand it. But we mustn't lose sight of the fact that communication skills are still going to be really important. One thing I have been doing since I've been getting more involved in data analytics, I have two, well, one just through teenage boy. Whenever they've been taking their options, I've said, can you do some data? Whatever you do, can you please do some data? You'll make yourself really employable if you could just do some data. So it's trying to encourage from the other way up as well, just to understand how data fits together.
It used to be whether you could speak Spanish or Mandarin, but is it data now?
It's data.
Any other questions? We've got about 10 minutes left. So, Jens, I suppose you're allowed another. Yeah.
This will be my last question, actually, so I promise you. But Julia, you did touch upon it, but I'd like to elaborate a little bit, because you mentioned the application of judgment. And I'd just like to sort of elaborate on that a bit and bring in the professional skepticism word. We are moving into I would say, a process of application of audit methodology that effectively means that in many instances, audit staff won't even be at the client. The audit staff can technically be anywhere in many ways. They can be back in the office, they can be in a totally third place, they can be in another country. And providing the sufficient security on data transfer and so on, that's perfectly applicable. How do you see us training the professionals of the future in terms of how they apply professional skepticism, how they challenge their clients on difficult issues, if increasingly they're not client-facing anymore?
I think that's a very good question. It's a question that's been asked. I'm not sure we know the answer. I think what's happening is partly the shape of the pyramid will change within the audit practices, because you've always taken on a lot of people at the junior level and people have left. So that shape of the pyramid will change. But there has to be, one of the things when we've been talking about it internally is, unless you've kind of gone through the exercise of seeing how the accounts fit together, seeing how judgment's applied, seeing how can you form that judgment? And I think it's a really, really good question. I think the answer will evolve. I think that there's no substitute for auditing. Despite sitting here with a data analytics IT hat on, there's no substitute for actually getting out and meeting your client and seeing the whites of their eyes. That sounds spooky, but actually, I used to say when I was auditing, I could tell more about a IT system by actually sitting down with the CIO for a couple of hours than perhaps spending a long time auditing. So I think there's a role for both, and it's how we actually marry those two together. I think it's a really good challenge. I'm not sure exactly what the answer is, other than we absolutely need to find one. That's not very helpful, but others say that we recognise the issue.
Well, from my perspective, I think for healthy skepticism, it does not need necessarily only the communication with the client, because a lot already origins from the information that you are provided with. Sometimes communication with the client helps to, let's say, put some shades around the idea that you had. Well, am I right here? So I'm a bit drawn between those instances. I think, after all, still there is communication. So there are tools like Skype. So if you want so, that are pretty good, actually. So we will probably see a virtualization of audits as well. So communication can be really done in video conferences with the client. So I see a good replacement for the physical being there. Although I also must say that, of course, the reactions of a client in his face or her face are a bit more tangible if you're sitting in front of him or her, rather than having that over a video conference. Yeah, but I think there are replacements for those kinds of judgments. Let's put it like this.
But I think you've also mentioned, two things before. One is, I'll use the term, if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So that whole thing of the professional skepticism of, well, is this all correct and complete? But also then when you analyze the results at the end, does this make all sense? Yes, because ultimately, yes, you're mainly only analyzing data that's in the client system. So it's their data. And does it actually make sense with your understanding, your knowledge, that it's showing this pattern? Does that make sense? And that's where I think the professional skepticism, and you have outliers. And coming back, I think, Olaf, to your point about the process mining, it's very interesting that I've seen this happen on clients, that you've suddenly shown the client that, did you know that 20% of your transactions do not go through the process that you think they do? And they're astounded. And I think this comes back to your point again, Julia, about the clients are going to want to do this. They're going to want to do more. And I've heard, I've worked a lot in the US, that US companies are very scared about data analytics from their auditors because they're going to find things they didn't know. And this is, for executives and everything like that. We're coming towards the end of our session here. Is there anyone else got any other questions? Yes? Young lady in the front.
Hello, I'm Cecilia Thorn from the Financial Reporting Council. So I work with Julia, but I'm in the international department. So I actually wanted to ask a question, which is the other side of the equation. So you have audit and innovation, data analytics, but stakeholders, and I'm thinking also about policymakers and politicians, we have audit failures and, they get very much involved when we have these bigger scandals. We had Carillion in the UK, etc. What about this space? Could that help? Or will it create new hurdles? Will it be, an increased demand from policymakers that, they want to really understand what is going on? We're talking about, using bots. Basically, the auditor as such doesn't have to be so much involved in all the processes and will more focus on the judgment side. How do we communicate that? And to what an extent could that be a problem when something goes wrong and they want to understand why it went wrong?
That's really a tough question to answer, because in any case, whenever a scandal is happening, you have to go into details and understand what really went wrong. Is it on the auditor side? First of all, it's probably on the client side, and then the question is, okay, had the auditor any evidence that he or she could have discovered that instance? So it's pretty hard to say if regulatory means would help to get an answer to that. In the past, we have seen the regulatory turn getting turned on and on and on. So we have seen more screws pulled to that angle, which probably is on one hand good for quality. On the other hand, we have seen at least in the profession a decrease of prices, which is another angle. So talking about efficiency and quality in that instance is something we may not lose out of sight here. I'm not sure if more regulation always helps to come to a better result. It's probably, as Miles mentioned before, it's more trying to get a balance between those issues. And so far, the balance has been torn into one direction quite intensively. And that's true probably for also reporting standards. The question always is, okay, do we get better results? Really tough to answer from my perspective. I see the consequences because more training is needed, more information is needed. We are going along with lots of checklists. And again, technology may represent a good opportunity to cope with those challenges. So if we make the right use of it, then probably a lot can be dealt with. But on the other hand, I see also the challenges for us as auditors, because if you look to the profession, the things you need to learn in order to do the job in the right way, not only tax, but also IFRS, also IT, also analytics, etc., it's getting more and more and more. Unfortunately, our brain has a certain capacity. And I'm not sure if the combination of specialists in every deal is the right combination, and regulation probably is not. So probably it needs to get the right balance. I'm not sure if it really answers your question, but for me it's a balance question.
I know in the UK there is a big debate going on about what an audit really is and what it could be. And of course, an audit is not a guarantee that a company will not fail. And I think, but as we talked a bit more on the ISO 240, and it's not a guarantee that there isn't a fraud in that company. Can we do more with the techniques, and should we be doing more, I think is the big debate. And my personal view is, yes, we should taking that thing forward. We should be able to, do more of highlighting what the risks are and maybe giving early warning signs about that something is not right here because we can see it in the data or whatever it is. So,
and just from a slightly different angle, I think it's probably worth saying that the debates that are being had about the auditing standards are that there's no intention that running data analytics will be made mandatory within the auditing standards, because there will always be some entities where you can't run data analytics. And so the way in which the auditing standards are being, as they go through their refreshment process, they are being sort of technology agnostic, also to recognise that technologies will change, and it could be data analytics now, in a couple of years it might be something else, but also looking to recognise that technology can come into play. So it's not going to come through the standards. But I think one of the ways that we work is trying to work closely with audit committee chairs and trying to kind of encourage the market to look for the increased usage.
okay. Thank you, everybody. I've got a clock here that's flashing at me that time is up. Firstly, I'd like to thank Julia and Olaf. Thank you very much for being candid, and thanks very much for coming today. And also thank you for the questions. And I think now we've got a coffee break, and we're back here in 15 minutes, I think is. So thank you very much.